My name is Vivek. I'm really happy to be here at TruffleCon this year. Truffle has been in I think first time I met Tim and team was in 2017 when I was at ETH Waterloo, just meeting Kevin Owaki and getting going with Gitcoin. So Vivek here, I've been working on the Gitcoin project for the last 3 years with Kevin, and most recently have been spending a lot of time on a community called KERNEL, which is something that has been born out of the Gitcoin ecosystem and truly the gift that it's been to work with hundreds of projects all the time, whether through grants rounds or through hackathons or just through bounties, and trying to find ways to continuously do interesting things with these people and hopefully add some small amounts of value. So I'm going to get into it by describing KERNEL a little bit more so that can set the stage for maybe a broader discussion on building communities in Web3. And I'm going to take, because of KERNEL, a more practical view in terms of, what does it look like when you're trying to get 250 people together across the internet to do something interesting and hopefully very meaningful to those people. I think there's a quote that I like that is, the future, we pick out moments from the future and bring them into our present and hopefully make memories that kind of can stay with us and have them in the past with us to continue on. So KERNEL has been a place where we've seen that happen. I have a bunch of joyous memories now from this past summer where we had this Give First community where we kind of set a very high bar. We said that we want the people in this community to be highly talented, give first, and hopefully really interested in Web3 for the next 5 to 10 years. And we had 600 applicants, and we narrowed down the list to 250 KERNEL fellows, which just from the start we kind of knew was gonna blow us away. This was coming into the program, things that we saw. They had started 50 companies. They came from places like the Ethereum Foundation, Coinbase, Facebook, the UN, Consensus, all of the big schools. They had been in Web3 for 2 to 2.5 years, so they kind of knew what was going on. We had Alex, MassMedge. That's kind of a holdover from when we kicked off, but you still could purchase his personal token if you're interested. But just like a super, super quality group, a very exciting group of people to be around. But that doesn't by itself, mean that good things or hopefully meaningful, valuable things will immediately happen. And so there was a structure that we put together to run this 8 weeks wisely. And the way that we did that was through these 8 sessions. We started with week 0 and we ended with week 7. We had guest speakers come in for our Thursday firesides. And then we went through the topics that we thought are most interesting to discuss at a high level in Web3. So that's starting with Ethereum's history and state, talking about a global financial system, what it means to build a global financial system, what the take back the web narrative that comes out of the Filecoin and the Saya world, what that's all about, internet age institutions, when Kevin talks about things like quadratic funding, when projects like SourceCred or OSCoin are interested in building new institutions using the technology that the blockchains allow. What does that mean? Tokens, mechanism design, what do tokens mean within this new context? How do we scale, and what does staking look like, and how do we think about that if more and more of the world is going to be transacting on Ethereum? And then maybe more importantly than all of them, we got down to something that we called the gift, which is something that we'll spend some time on today. This syllabus, I think, has taught me more about building community, especially doing it with such a highly talented group of 250 of people that I consider peers, that I knew no better way than just to kind of pick pieces of this syllabus to describe what it is that I thought happened during KERNEL. And maybe more broadly, what I think is happening in Web3 when we think about communities. So with that, we'll kind of pick and choose from different parts of the syllabus, starting with module 0, which is trust, couple things from the middle, and then kind of skipping to the end. So instead of going through the 8 weeks of kernel, you guys are getting it in 20 or so minutes. So yeah, I suppose one thing that I would like to do, if anyone is willing, is kind of start with a question about trust. And when we talk about trust in Web3, there's kind of this sense that trust is meaningful, and that that's one of the key characteristics of Bitcoin and Ethereum. But I kind of want to open it up and see if anyone in the chat or who would like to talk has any thoughts on what trust means to them. And it's totally okay if no one responds. I'm used to talking to myself, but I'll pause for just a second to see if anyone has any thoughts. Fair enough. Confidence and reciprocity. I like that one. Trusting institutions, that is deteriorating. Hector, good to see you, by the way. It's been a while. I agree. It is definitely deteriorating. One thing that we use to describe trust, and we used Bitcoin as a place to think about this, is there was a maxim when Bitcoin began which said, don't trust, verify. And the way that we thought about it and presented it in the trust module, which I'll link just in case people are interested. This is one of my favorite, the 16 modules. Trust begins where verification ends. Trust becomes much more meaningful once you know how people can lie within a particular system. And it's really interesting to think about what that means in the context of Ethereum, where we use this language, Solidity, and this open source technology. First and foremost, it's not just people running around. The thing that has brought all these people together is a technology at first. And I think sometimes when we talk about community, we like forget about that part. But we have this technology that succinctly describes what it is to do positive actions. It also does that by defining cheating very clearly, and it enforces penalties within that system in a deterministic way, so that no one has to guess when cheating is going to be enforced. And the fact that we're doing this on this open, transparent ledger brings me to that kind of bottom right point, which is that it allows us to experiment with interpersonal trust in ways that were previously not possible. And so to take that from the philosophical to the practical, with the 250 people that I was working with in Kernel, they were building 75 projects in Ethereum. I am working on a project called Gitcoin, which wants to see Ethereum succeed. Therefore, just by the fact that I'm building in the same ecosystem as them, there is an implicit model of trust built into the fact that we are using a similar technology to build. And that is extremely, extremely powerful, more so than I think we usually even give it credit for. The fact that we are all building on the same system gives us this implicit incentive to do things in a way that we otherwise might not. And it's even, more so than, when you think about great technology communities of the past, the Y Combinators of the world. I think that Ethereum takes it to a completely different level, because it's not just that we have a bunch of technology companies building together. We are building on the same global platform. So that brings me to the thing on the left, which maybe is more practical and was more practical for me as I thought through how do I design an 8-week syllabus and how do I kind of build something for 250 of my closest friends and peers who are working in Web3. And this is from a game from a man named Nicky Case, which I recommend to literally anyone who's willing to spend the 20 or 30 minutes. It is the best game that I've seen on the internet, frankly. And that's a big statement, but hopefully you play it and you don't take my word for it. But Nikki Case, and just to describe it a bit more, I think it's much broader than crypto. I think it has a lot to say about what's been happening in 2020 with the world that we live in. But what it describes is how important, game theoretically, it is for us to trust each other. What happens when distrust is seeded at large societal levels, and what happens if we can bring that back together. And I won't spoil it for you, but the TLDR is that it is incredibly important for the people within a society to trust each other. And there are three main characteristics of building trust. That is repeat interactions. So the sense that if I meet you once, I am likely to continue meeting you in different contexts. And I'm happy Hector's here because I'll use him as an example as somebody who I met in Austin at South by Southwest in 2018. And just so happens over the course of the last 2 years, because we're both working in Ethereum, we come across each other in interesting and useful ways. The potential for win-win scenarios, which is that my success can be a part of your success can be a part of my success. And again, the Ethereum system helps so much with this. The fact that if any of those 75 companies go on to do something great and I am building an Ethereum, that is great news. And then low miscommunication, maybe more practically, for 250 people, we were looking for tools and software, kind of like Hopin, for example, that increased the ability for us to communicate well. We used one called AirMeet for the majority of our 8 weeks, which led to small group rooms where you could kind of interact with the 250 people. That randomness was very nice. I heard of people just having coffees without us in the AirMeet for hours at a time because the AirMeet was open for the whole 8 weeks. There was no moderator. There was no person who had to be there. And the rooms were capped at sizes of 8 people each. So AirMeet was a really cool software because we had, Slack with 250 people in it. We had a list of those 250 people, and we said, do your part to be a part of this community, interact with each other, find ways to help each other's projects. And I thought that was the most important thing, that even if we didn't have anything from a syllabus perspective, but we brought the people together in interesting ways, that cool things would happen. So I'll leave the soapbox, but it starts with trust. The next thing, if you take trust to the next level, is you try to think about like, okay, well, how would community building in Web3 lead to the most value out of that trust? You need trust to build value, but once you have trust, what does that look like? And this is where I think we as a Web3 community need to look to kind of the best community builders on the internet, which is game designers, the people who have had millions of people using their products, thinking about this for 20 years. And there's a great collective called Lost Garden, who actually meets in Texas once a year without the COVID times. They're game designers. They're kind of like the smartest people, I think, building token economies, but we don't talk about them enough. And they have this article where they describe pro-social value, and they bring up these positive values that you should build within communities. You should design for friendship, which requires repeat interactions. You should design for thriving individuals. So the kernel experience, while it is 250 great people, is ultimately about individual change. And when we showed the 16 lessons that are being taught, there are 8 personal lessons and 8 Web3 lessons, with that interest in what does this do to you as you go about your day-to-day life, which is not about, crypto 24/7, hopefully, if you stay off crypto Twitter. Altruism, positive group norms, shared goals, all of these things. And then it ends with a Kurt Vonnegut quote, which is, what should young people do with their lives today? Many things, but the most daring is to create stable communities in which the terrible disease of loneliness can be cured. And that's one thing that really stood out to me when we were going through Kernel, which is that the 250 people that were a part of Kernel, it wasn't that we were competing with like other potential things that these people could do in Web3. It was do you want to be with this group of 250, or do you want to scroll through Twitter, or do you want to be on your Instagram feed? Or do you want to be in these Web2 models of basically your time being sucked away from you by a model that is outdated and not conducive to these particular things that make us happier human beings? So I would encourage us to think, when we think about community building, it's not about building for our particular community as much as it's building to protect the time and the minds of the people who are a part of our community so that they can be better versions of just themselves, which better is even a word that I struggle to use sometimes. It's just like more true versions, perhaps. And so, yeah, I kind of got to it, but like, this is all hippy dippy, and you can tell Kevin in Colorado is rubbing off on me, but the reality is like much, like I would say, fishier, right? We don't have a world that is as thriving as the one that I've just described. You have the borders, you have extraction, you have the master-slave dynamic where somebody creates the money and then other people compete to see at what stage in the process they could be. Even client-server architecture instead of peer-to-peer architecture of anything has this downstream impact. And it's not necessarily the case that our communities have to be built like this. And so for Kernel, for example, I'm very explicit about calling the people within Kernel my peers, because that's truly what it is. And it wouldn't be the same if we thought of the Kernel group as a group of people that we are trying to get a particular thing out of and then move on with our lives. It's something to curate. It's something to spend time with. And I think that we can take that mentality from our money to many other things with our earth and our world that can lead to better outcomes for us as a society. And so that brings me to kind of a final point about the gift that we are given with Ethereum that allows us to build these stronger communities is a universal language. And this was the last module of Kernel, where we said that there's a universal language deployed on a shared, transparent, and ownerless global network where we together can play increasingly principled multiplayer games. And again, I know that this might seem super hippy-dippy, but it's very practical in Gitcoin's world. We have this group of 250 people where we invited them to be a part of Kernel, and we asked them if they get value out of the program to give back to the Kernel community, to consider whether a 1% advisor share within their company is something they'd be willing to give to Kernel to pass the gift forward. And the way that we think about it is that this is what open source has always been. If we go prior to Web3 and we look at this wonderful man with the mustache, Eric Raymond, he was one of the pioneers of open source software, and open source software was always a gift. It was something that was being given out of the kind of the extra time that I would say wealthier software engineers were so lucky to have, which was their gift that they were given by down the line. But now this open source software was what allowed us to think about things like Bitcoin and Ethereum. And now that Bitcoin and Ethereum have provided a monetary impact on our open source software and a monetary incentive to sustain open source software, we're at a particularly interesting place. And I do think Burning Man might be a place to talk about this. And I will say, like, quite practically, that like this article references not only Eric Raymond, but the creator of Burning Man, actually. And the gift economy, before you think about it from like the Burning Man point of view, was something that was based on a paper that came from open source software circles, which is really cool to kind of like think about when you think about the history of Burning Man. And yeah, the gift economy has always been criticized, and this is something we talk about in the Giving article, not for the fact that it would be a good idea, but for the fact that implementing a gift economy is impractical. But one thing that at least we put forward in Kernel as we think about building our community and we think about building Web3 communities is that this new characteristic that the money is built into the code, that money and speech and software are now combining, is one that allows us to think about these gift economies and these gift communities. And doing that at kind of like scale is something that's never been considered at really practically, I think, before, that we now potentially can. So I think that the most important part of this, and the part that I find to be the more interesting question from here is how do we let everyone in? It's not such a fun party, and it's the hippy dippy stuff gets a lot more boring if only a few people can participate in this type of environment. And it's something that we take quite seriously at Gitcoin. It's something that at Kernel we've been quite deliberate about. Out of the 250 people who are in Kernel, 50 countries are represented. I'm glad Iman is here, who's a Kernel fellow and just had a great talk of her own at TruffleCon. And yeah, it's been an amazing experience, but it's early days. And one of the things that I think about when I think about this is that, you know, one or two interested people who have a particular interest that they want to build a 150 to 200 person community for, they have more resources at their fingertips to do so and to treat those people with more respect and attention than Instagram or Facebook or Twitter could right now, right? You're not competing against other communities. You're competing against algorithms that are not thinking about this in the same way that we are. They're not thinking about building thriving individuals. And one of the things that I'm kind of advocating for here is that if you do that, the gift will come back. The monetary incentive to build a community of that particular kind is one that is built into what's going on here. And it's not just at Kernel. You should check out things like Seed Club. You should check out things like Fair Launch, SourceCred. The list goes on. But there's a variety of crypto projects that are not at a theoretical stage anymore, but are at a practical, if you do it, interesting things can happen stage. So it's a conversation for a community builder to have with themselves. And that's, I think, where I'll leave us. The quote from the end of Kernel is in the bottom right there, which is that we've all been given a gift, the gift of life. What we do with our lives is the gift back. And it comes from a video that's about a topic called Sacred Economics, which again is from this particular kind of like thought line. I'll share the link in the chat. That's all right. That's the wrong link, but let's see if I can get it. And it's not working out, but I'll get it in there in a second. But yeah, the last question is like, what will you use this technology to say? We have these digital economic spaces that no one owns in the same way that no one owns words, which is something that has never really been something we could say about our software before now. So it's an open question for us all. And thank you. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Cool. I think I have the ability to get people on stage or ask questions if you have any, but all good if not. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, please do check out the modules. I having trouble getting the link going, but I put one up at the top. The kernel.community module 0 is the trust one. If you just go to module 7, you'll get to this last one about giving. See one of my favorite poems by Mary Oliver. And I have to give a lot of credit to Andy Tudhope, who is the author of the Kernel syllabus and has taught me a lot in the process of Kernel. So thanks, Fina. Thanks, Mom. Good to see you, Hector.